Hello viewers, my name is Bruce Lewis and you're looking at HowTruthful. This is a tool that I wrote that is for exploring ideas. In it you write an idea down, collect evidence for and against that idea, then form an opinion on how truthful the original idea is. And this is useful for everyday decisions as well. For example, should I make this video in the first place? There were a number of things that I took into consideration. There were pros, there were cons. One of the pros is that HowTruthful has just been rewritten. I wrote one version back in 2018, and this is the new version that you're looking at now. It's better in a lot of ways. There's a few things that are reused from the old place, including actually all the data. So people who put public opinions on the old HowTruthful will find them on the new HowTruthful. But the main thing that I want to talk about in this video is how and why HowTruthful is satisfyingly effective. Now, first let me explain what you're looking at. So at the top there's the idea that you write down that you're seeking to form an opinion about. When you first put it in, it is marked debatable on this rating scale from 1 false to 5 true. Now, after collecting evidence for and against, I came to the conclusion that this is true. Yes, I should make this video, so that's why it's got the 5 rating. And let's talk about why I decided that. Mainly, it's that HowTruthful is satisfyingly effective, and this reason itself has reasoning behind it. The 3 plus indicates that there are 3 pro arguments underneath this one. The 1 minus means that there's 1 con argument, 1 argument against HowTruthful being satisfyingly effective that I brought into consideration before I decided, yes, it really is. Now, let me talk about why it is satisfyingly effective. It's a satisfyingly effective tool for exploring reasoning you agree with and reasoning you don't agree with. Let me explain. So, let me talk about first why it's a satisfyingly effective tool for exploring your own reasoning. Life sometimes involves sorting through complex issues, and it's well known that complex issues become simpler when we choose a potential answer and write down its pros and cons. But as we've seen, pros and cons can indeed have their own pros and cons. If you were to write down in a document a tree of pros and cons and just indent a little more every time you got into, well, here are the pros of this pro and so on, it would quickly get confusing. But HowTruthful is really designed for layers and layers of pros and cons, and you can just keep clicking through and you don't lose track of where you are. You see right where you are. So that's why it's satisfyingly when you're exploring your own reasoning, but it's also a satisfyingly effective tool for exploring reasoning you might not agree with. So by marking ideas debatable in the first place when you first put them in, this helps you write down ideas you might not agree with. That's because there's this dilemma where you can write down ideas, or you want to write down ideas, because doing so makes exploring them easier. On the other hand, you don't want to write them down because you don't like writing down things that aren't true. I mean, that feels dishonest. Well, what you could do is write down things with a big disclaimer saying this is just a thought, it might or might not be true, actually it's probably not true, I'm really just exploring it to understand other people's reasoning. Instead of writing all that down, you just type it into HowTruthful and it's marked immediately with a 1-digit disclaimer. The 3 shows it's debatable, and then you can just go on to filling in all the evidence for and against it to your heart's content. So it's also a satisfyingly effective way to avoid being one of those people who ignores reasoning they disagree with. Okay, we all know people like that. We don't want to be like that. HowTruthful is satisfyingly effective for not being like that. Now, not only can you explore reasoning yourself, but you can use this to persuade others. And it's a satisfyingly effective persuasion tool, which I can tell you from personal experience. And it's not because it presents cold, hard facts so plainly. It's because people are more willing to listen to you if they know you've considered alternative views. HowTruthful lets you lay out all kinds of reasoning and concisely indicate how truthful you believe it is. For example, you can put in, say you believe something is true, And so the pro arguments are sort of your side. If there's an argument that's commonly made that you don't agree with, you want to say, well, I'm not saying this argument you've heard that you have reason to not like. You can put it in there, but also mark it as false. On the con side, which would be opposing what you believe about this idea, you could write down all the things that people might say opposing your view, and you can mark them true if you think that they are true, but they just weren't important enough to make you change your mind. You can mark them false just to say, well, I'm aware of this argument, but I just don't think it's true. So by laying all that out, people will see what you've considered, and you'll just get more respect. It's very satisfying as a persuasion tool. Now, one way I like to talk about it is how Truthful is doing for reasoning what spreadsheets did for numbers. Arranging information in a two-dimensional structure was not new when spreadsheets came out. Typing formulas into computers for them to calculate was not new when spreadsheets came out. What spreadsheets did was combine existing elements into something new that made number crunching much easier. So, similarly, dividing an argument into bite-sized pieces is not a new concept, and 5-point rating scales are not a new concept. Pros and cons are a concept that long predates computers, but what HowTruthful did was combine these existing elements into something new that makes exploring reasoning much easier. Let's look at an argument against the idea that HowTruthful is satisfyingly effective. One might say HowTruthful is hard to use. For example, nothing even indicates that the sentences under pro and con are clickable. And that's true. You do have to hover before you see the underlines that give you a hint that it's a link. However, you've been watching me click them in this video, so I don't think you'll have trouble with that. But there are a number of features that are hard to discover, and I'm going to show them to you so that you don't have to discover them yourself. But before I do that, I want to say that there's a reason why HowTruthful looks the way it does. Omitting handles, clickable pencils, trash cans, other icons, it keeps HowTruthful looking clean and modern, and it's important for HowTruthful to look clean and modern. This is something that I didn't know a few years ago. What I thought at the time was that potential HowTruthful users are seeking pure reason, so they won't be biased by HowTruthful's appearance. It doesn't matter how it looks as long as it fulfills the function, right? No. Underlying that is an assumption that because they're aware that you can be biased by appearance, they won't be biased by appearance. It's not true that knowing about a bias means you can avoid it. Maybe sometimes it's true, but I think it's generally false. Now, the reasons why it's true that it's important for HowTruthful to look clean and modern. One is that for HowTruthful to become popular, people need to enjoy using it. And related, people's enjoyment of a website depends as much on design as it does on function. Maybe you already knew that, but it was a revelation to me. But this new design definitely reflects the importance of having it look and feel nice. Okay, let's talk about the features that are hard to discover. I'm going to click into that. We've already talked about the underlines for the pro and con links. Let's talk about top navigation. There's no handle up there or anything that looks like a menu for you to drop down. But there's this nice modern thing that opens up and gives you all your navigation. The most important one is going to be your private opinions, and with that, you don't need to register or anything. You just jump in and start putting in ideas. So I'm going to do that, and I will use it to illustrate these others. I'm going to open it in a new tab so that I can switch back and forth pretty easily. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about, the heading for your own opinion on HowTruthful doesn't look editable. So click on one of your opinions here. Say you want to change the wording. which you definitely would want to do because it doesn't stand by itself. You would go in and edit everything here. I'm not going to edit right now, but I'm going to demonstrate if you want to delete, you go in and edit it down to nothing, and the save button becomes a delete button. No trash can icon. This is how you delete. Okay, if you want to add pro and con arguments, click the heading where you want to add them, and it will prompt you to argue for or argue against the main statement. Click again to make them go away. Let's add another pro argument here. Let's see, I think it's blue. This is a feature where it remembers ideas you've already put in, and it will remember what you've rated them and if they have pros and cons, so you can reuse your thinking in other contexts. You can reorder. Move this up, move this down. There's no handle to show you can drag, but you can drag. All right, what have we covered? We covered editing, deleting, adding pros and cons, drag and drop to reorder. One thing is, if you want to change the truthfulness rating of one of these things, it doesn't let you just click that and change it. You click the link to go in and look at it by itself. There's a reason for this, and that is that we're biased toward believing an idea is true if it supports our existing ideas, so it's better to look at an idea in isolation when rating its truthfulness. Okay, so that's why it works that way. One last thing, if you want to keep an idea in your collection, but you don't want it here, you want to just unlink it, drag it to the left margin, and it's gone. And public opinions works the same way, except that is a premium feature. You do have to pay for it because I don't want to deal with spammers, and also because I want some, I want people to give me feedback that this is a worthwhile thing. I think this is a great tool, and I think that if you try it, you'll find that you can use it to make the world a more reasonable place. Thanks.